All right, well, welcome everyone. Super excited to announce a new initiative that we'll be doing in partnership with Conn Macial Carey this year. We've been in talks for a little while about it. We've worked together, Safety Connect, and a number of different webinars in the past. So we wanted to formalize it a little bit, and this year do OSHA Quicktakes. So the whole idea is that every month we'll get together with a rotating cast of Conn Macial Carey OSHA experts, and we'll touch on a number of different topics. What's coming down the pipe? What are the hot buttons for the year? And then Conn Macial Carey will be doing an in-depth webinar towards the end of the month to really explore these topics in a lot more detail. So we wanted to give you a quick update, know what's coming, and then point you to the long form webinar that you can catch later in the month. So this first one that we're going to do to kick off 2023 is a little bit of a year in review, and then a look ahead to what those priorities are going to look like in 2023. So with that, I'll maybe let the panel go around the block here and just introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the topics. Eric, did you want to kick things off?
Sure. Thanks so much, Scott, for this great idea of getting together every month and providing a little high-level review of a topic that we're planning to get into in detail later in the month. I'm Eric Conn. I'm one of the founding partners and the chair of the OSHA practice group at Conn Macial Carey. I've been practicing in the field of workplace safety and health law pretty much exclusively in OSHA law for 23 years now. And I was very proud 8 years ago to launch Conn Macial Carey with many of my colleagues on the presentation today and others that you'll see throughout the year. We just celebrated our 8-year anniversary back in September, and we're now about 14 lawyers that specialize in workplace safety and health law, working out of 7 cities around the country, and working with a bunch of great clients, employers, and trade associations in managing OSHA inspections and investigations, and working on OSHA rulemakings, and providing compliance advice and counsel to employers all across the country.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Kate, did you want to go next? I'm going around the horn on my screen here. So
sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, Scott. This is an exciting new step we're taking this year. I hope it's going to be very informative to Safepedia's audience. I'm Kate McMahon. I am a colleague of Eric Conn's and Aaron's and Lindsay's, who are on the phone today with us. We look very forward to presenting what I hope is going to be really helpful information, pretty detailed information about the plans that OSHA has. We expect that 2023 and 2024, in particular 2023, is going to be a very, very active year for OSHA. We understand that the Department of Labor is sending messages to OSHA to use every tool in their toolbox to make sure that they do their job and fulfill their mission to keep workers safe. And that means employers need to be very vigilant to do their job to keep their workers safe. And we hope to work with you guys and partner with you to help the community understand the obligations and how to ensure that their workers go home safe every day. So with that, Aaron, you want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Gelb. I am a partner in the Chicago office where I lead the firm's Midwest OSHA practice. And echoing what both Kate and Eric have said, I've already been on site with OSHA for about 3 days so far this year. And given that it's the 9th, that says something. Those are the tools. You stole my line, Kate. I was going to say the same exact thing, that the tools are being deployed, and we'll look forward to talking to everyone about what we've seen in the past year out in the field. I spent a lot of time in the field in factories and job sites with OSHA, and kind of let you all know what we're seeing and expect to see in the year ahead.
And I guess I'll finish us out. Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay DiSalvo. I'm a partner at Conn Macial Carey in both the OSHA and the labor and employment practice, which sort of gives me a unique opportunity to work in both areas related to some of these cases. One of the tools that OSHA has been employing and will employ is their whistleblower provision. So that's definitely something we're going to talk a little bit about today. We'll talk more in detail about later in the month. But that's definitely something that we've seen and believe we'll continue to see over the next year.
Great. And I'll just mention quick as well that we'll have links, to the full webinar and to everyone's contact information, so you can connect with folks on LinkedIn or email, and definitely register for the monthly webinar with Conn Macial Carey as well. So with that, let's kind of touch on 2022, and certainly what was one of the bigger topics over the last few years, and hopefully will become maybe less of a topic going forward. But if we want to touch on COVID-19 updates for 2022 and moving forward, that'd be great.
Yeah, so at a high level, what we do every January, and this is the webinar series we've been doing the last 8 years since we launched the firm, is a free monthly webinar about some hot OSHA topic. In January every year, the topic is a look back at OSHA from the year before and a forecast of what to expect from OSHA in the upcoming year. And the major topics we're intending to cover this year, and we had hoped that we could actually scratch COVID-19 off the list. It's obviously been a topic in and of itself. If you deal in workplace safety and health, you deal with OSHA at all, that's really been where the agency has been for the last few years. We thought that this might be the year that we wouldn't be talking about COVID in the look back or the look ahead, but we can't quite get there yet. 2022 was remarkable on the COVID front in a few different ways. One, although it was very, very early in 2022, but that was the year that the Supreme Court took up the legal challenge to the COVID-19 vaccinate or test rule. And that rule was essentially struck down. The Supreme Court put in effect a stay and signaled to OSHA that it would strike down the rule if it came back from the circuit courts. And OSHA withdrew the rule, but it was effectively withdrawn because the Supreme Court said, we're not having it. And it wasn't just about the vaccination rule itself, but the Supreme Court really sent a strong signal about COVID not really belonging in OSHA's basket, that there might be some settings like healthcare where it is COVID is uniquely work-related, but otherwise this is not really an area that OSHA should be regulating. And that really knocked OSHA back on its heels. And that changed the entire complexion of how the agency had been dealing with COVID in the prior couple of years. And so 2022 was pretty quiet unless you were a healthcare employer. And OSHA had an enforcement blitz. They were working on a rule for a permanent COVID rule for healthcare. So it was really quite a mixed bag, but a pretty dramatic year on the COVID front because of the Supreme Court decision and then how OSHA reacted to that. So we'll get into some detail about what happened in 2022 and where your focus should be as an employer relative to COVID in 2023. And really the spoiler is, if you're not in healthcare, we don't think there's a whole lot to be concerned about on the OSHA regulatory or enforcement side, but they're going to keep after it in the healthcare space for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's good news for most, I assume. And if OSHA's kind of taking their focus away from COVID, what is going to be the focus for 2023?
Aaron, you want to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think what we can expect is a return to the pre-pandemic priorities, right? And I think as a kind of transition point or to segue, having been out in the field, when I think back to the beginning of 2022, and one inspection that I worked in particular that started in the spring, right? We were meeting with OSHA in the conference room. There were plexiglass barriers at each station or each chair on the conference room table. Everybody was wearing a mask. And when I was on site with the same compliance officer last week, no masks, no questions about COVID. So in terms of being out in the field, their OSHA is returning to the inspection levels. I think the data that we've seen shows that about, I think, a little over 30,000 inspections last year, which was right where we were the 2 years prior to the pandemic beginning. So I think we're going to, and I would expect this year we're going to go past that number. Certainly, if OSHA's able to continue hiring new compliance officers, so expect to see a similar number of inspections as we used to see during COVID. I think during the first year it probably dropped down close to 20,000. And I can remember that year doing a handful of inspections by Zoom, safety people walking around with FaceTime trying to show OSHA something in the factory because they didn't want to come in. So expect them to be out in the same number. But I think the things that I've seen in the last year that are probably most significant among them are real uptick in follow-up inspections. I think OSHA, consistent with what Kate said about using the tools, right? I mean, everyone knows about inspections that take place as a result of a reported amputation or a fatality or inpatient hospitalization. But I've had numerous clients that have been visited for follow-up inspections, and in some cases for inspections that occurred 2 years prior, even inspections that were closed without a citation. They just show up to open that inspection, and it sometimes will coincide with a complaint about something else. So they use that as an opportunity then to do the follow-on inspection. So if you have an issue that you were concerned about or not really comfortable with how it's been corrected, I would certainly continue to focus on that, because there's a decent chance that OSHA will come back to do a follow-up inspection. I think the other big thing is the increase or the use of emphasis programs, and depending on where you are, there's been a uptick in local and regional emphasis programs. So here in the Midwest, there's a new food manufacturing emphasis program that was rolled out spring of 2022 in Wisconsin, and it's just expanded into both Illinois and Ohio starting last week. Those are going to be very comprehensive inspections. So anyone in the food manufacturing sector needs to get ready for those. I think in Region 3, there's an emphasis program for warehousing and operations. So I encourage folks to go onto OSHA's website and look in the region that you're in to see if there are any new emphasis programs. There's also, I think Kate's going to talk about heat illness. There's a national heat illness emphasis program. And I think, so that's the efforts to get out, be proactive, to get out there. So even if you haven't had an accident or a complaint, OSHA may simply show up based on an employer's NAICS code in the industry they're in. And I think the other thing, in addition to, we'll be seeing, I think in the next week or so, the new penalty authority, which I'm expecting that serious citations will be over $15,000 max fine, and repeats and willfuls probably over $150,000 starting in a few weeks. And then last but not least, last year we saw the highest number of significant cases, those that are over 100,000 or more. I think it was well over 200 last year. I expect that number will be matched and probably surpassed this year. And when you can cite up to 150,000 for a repeat or willful, it's pretty easy to go over 100,000. So I think the other really significant thing that we're watching is the changes to the SPEP program. So Eric, I'll hand it back to you to talk about that.
Yeah, if you've seen me speak before on OSHA enforcement, I have probably an unhealthy obsession with OSHA's severe violator enforcement program. It's a program that I've been trying to work with OSHA for years to fix some of the big problems. And I think they took all my suggestions and said, what is the exact opposite? How can we make this program worse? And towards the end of 2022, OSHA rolled out a major policy change to its severe violator enforcement program. We're going to get into a lot of detail about this, both in our January webinar and in a program later in the year about repeat and willful violations and things like this. But the severe violator enforcement program is a way for OSHA to direct its enforcement resources to bad actors, to employers whom OSHA believes have shown indifference to their workplace safety obligations. And it used to be fairly difficult to get into this program. It took, the main category that got people in was 2 or more repeat or willful violations about a very small subset of particular hazards, particular standards in OSHA's portfolio. They rewrote the program at the end of last year to say 2 or more willful or repeat violations involving any hazard or any standard will qualify you into the program within a single inspection. And OSHA anticipates, looking back at prior enforcement, that this will triple the number of employers that get tripped up in and qualified into this program. That sounds right to me, looking at the data that I've seen. So this is a program that you used to think, well, we're not bad actors, we don't have to worry about this. But the idea that it has now become way easier for employers to qualify into this program, it's something that everybody needs to pay attention to. And I'm looking forward to some in-depth discussions about SVEP over the course of the year.
Right. Well, thanks, Eric. And I know that regulatory reform is still on the docket. So Kate, did you want to touch on what we can expect for 2023?
Sure, Scott. Yeah, Eric and Aaron have been talking to date about inspections and enforcement, but on the other side of the house for OSHA is the regulatory rulemaking side of the house, where the agency identifies areas where they don't have a rule and they build a rule. We expect that there is going to be a lot of activity. In fact, as much or more that we're seeing on the enforcement and inspection side, we're going to see on the rulemaking side. So national OSHA is going to be very, they're going to make every effort to move the ball forward as fast and as well as they can in 2023. They know they've got 1 4-year term. They don't know whether they're going to have a second term or not. So they're going to try to advance the rulemaking agenda of the Biden administration as best they can before everything shuts down mid 2024 in an election year. So their priorities, right? I mean, they have a full agenda. The Directorate of Standards and Guidance is the portion of OSHA that sort of leads the charge on rulemaking. Their agenda is full, but the top rules that we think are going to have the broadest and biggest impact that we want to make you all aware of, and we're going to talk in depth about these at various different webinars we have through the course of the year, including in this upcoming one later in January. First of all, the e-record keeping rule, OSHA is making an effort to change their rule to cast a wider and deeper net. So what that means is that all the companies that are out there that have to submit data are going to have to submit more data if this rule is promulgated the way OSHA would like to submit it. So more detailed data, and it's going to cover a broader group of companies than are currently covered. So broader and deeper net for record keeping OSHA 300 log data and information. Heat illness, Aaron mentioned heat illness emphasis program on the enforcement side. OSHA's also, neck deep in a heat illness rulemaking. They are moving very aggressively, very fast to get a rule advanced. It's going to cover both indoor and outdoor heat. I think they'd like to get a proposed rule out before this first 4-year term is over. And they're doing a tremendous amount of work and have gathered a tremendous amount of data from employers and employee groups about, whether they can and should and promulgate a heat illness rule and what that should look like, what its components should be. 2 mainstays, fundamental rules of OSHA, the lead standard, occupational exposure to lead, that's been around since, the mid 1970s when OSHA was first a baby agency, one of their first rules. They're actually thinking about a major redo of the lead rule to deal not only with the level at which the level of lead in blood that would cause a worker to be taken out of the workplace and then brought back into the workplace, but also potentially anyway, a wholesale revision to the lead standard, which would have potentially major impact on metals industry clients and entities out there. And HAZCOM, which is a standard, again, one of OSHA's sort of mainstay standards, broad standard related to chemicals in the workplace and how you, as a manufacturer, how you develop SDSs and label your products, how you do your analysis of what the hazard is associated with that chemical. There are some major changes that OSHA is thinking about making that will mainly impact manufacturers of chemicals, but also could have downstream effects on downstream employers, those people who buy those chemicals and use them in the workplace and their employees have exposure to. And then the last one I want to at least tab for you guys is the emergency response rule. OSHA has begun an emergency response rulemaking, and it remains to be seen how broad that the changes are going to be and how deep they're going to be. Looks like they're going to at least update, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but they're going to update the standard to meet today's technology. There's a lot more technology out there about how you deal with the equipment available for emergency response, and so OSHA's going to move that rulemaking forward as well.
Right.
And lots more.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Sounds like there's a lot to keep your eye on for 2023. And Lindsay, they're still focusing on continuing to focus whistleblower process, and you're going to touch on a few of the updates there.
Yes, exactly. So on the whistleblower front, I think there's sort of two main parts to that going into 2023. There is the enforcement side, which I think is probably the more important for most employers on a day-to-day basis, is what they're doing enforcement wise. But there is also a rulemaking effort in the whistleblower context. As some may already know, OSHA is charged with investigating and coming to conclusions related to whistleblower provisions for, I believe, around 25 laws. So it's the OSHA Act plus a bunch of other laws. So there is an effort to sort of work on the regulations surrounding those individual laws to make them more accessible to employers and employees, and to also, sort of make them more consistent so that people sort of understand the process to the extent that they can, because these laws are, they also have their own provisions that need to go into the regulation. So there is some differences no matter what. But I think, the hope is to make them more consistent. But back to the enforcement side, whistleblower activity is something that we've seen a lot of over the last several years, particularly since COVID. I think a lot more employees sort of became aware of the options available out there if they feel like they have been wronged. And one of them is whistleblower provisions, retaliation provisions, particularly 11C of the OSHA Act. So we've seen a lot of activity on that front over the last several years. We anticipate that for 2023 as well. OSHA, did hire a bunch of investigators, I believe back in 21 and 22, a lot more whistleblower investigators who are really going to be focused on those particular issues. So I think that has definitely driven more of the action that we've seen, and also some of the quicker timelines that we've seen on some of the whistleblower investigations. But OSHA has definitely been investing in the whistleblower program. And so we expect to see quite a bit of activity on that front. So we'll talk about that in more detail. And we actually also have a webinar, I believe in March, that's going to be specifically dedicated to how to sort of respond to whistleblower complaints.
Right, great. Well, thank you guys for joining today. We're really excited to kick off the OSHA Quick Take in January. We've been talking about doing this for a while. We know there's so many changes coming down the pipe, and there's so many things to be aware of and be on top of, that we wanted to provide that outlet for you guys to connect with and hear from the experts, and then follow up, with any particular topics. So Kate, Lindsay, Aaron, and Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. If people have questions, again, we'll leave the link to the webinar in later January that's coming up. But what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you guys, Eric, if they have some specific questions that they wanna dig into? Oh.
Yeah, you'll have our contact information up there. Certainly feel free to reach out by email or phone to any of the four of us or anybody on our team at all. We're big OSHA nerds. We love talking about this sort of stuff. We love hearing about your experiences out in the field, and happy to talk through issues that you might encounter. Phone call or email, always good. And we keep talking about the later in January webinar. It's Thursday, January 26th.
Yeah, sorry.
specifically. I think it's 1 p.m. Eastern is our first, our kickoff webinar for the 2023 series. It's the 2022 year in review and 23 forecast. Over the course of the rest of the year, we've got great programs on OSHA rulemaking updates, preparing for and managing OSHA inspections, an in-depth dive into powered industrial trucks, conducting safety-related investigations and audits, all kinds of good topics this year, combustible dust, you name it. Their full agenda is already built, and I'm sure there'll be a link to that as well. So we look forward to seeing you all a couple of times a month for this little preview and the more detailed discussions over the course of the year. And I'm looking forward to visiting with you, Scott, more often and doing just that.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Well, thanks so much, and tune in for next month. I think we're covering what was it, annual OSHA enforcement and regulation updates specifically next month.
Next month is Cal OSHA in particular, so it's another annual Cal OSHA update, and that is, we talk about how active Fed OSHA is. Cal OSHA has fewer impediments than federal OSHA does. So they're always very active, a lot going on out there. So we do a special program just for the California agency.
Great. Well, thanks again, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.